Story 1: The Desolate Road. I had been driving for hours, heading back home after a long business trip. It was late, and I was exhausted. The highway stretched out endlessly, a narrow strip of asphalt cutting through miles of desolate landscape. The hum of my car was the only sound keeping me company. The fuel gauge had been flirting with empty for the last 20 minutes, and I knew I had to find a gas station soon. My GPS had been spotty, losing signal in this remote area, and I was relying on my instincts. Finally, a sign appeared out of the darkness: gas station 5 miles. Relieved, I drove on, my car sputtering slightly as I neared the station. It was an old, run-down place, a relic from a bygone era. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the pumps. There was only one other car parked nearby, a rusted, ancient sedan that looked like it hadn't moved in years. I pulled up to the pump and got out. The night was eerily silent, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind. As I began to pump gas, I noticed the convenience store's lights were on, but there was no one inside. I needed to pay, so I walked towards the store, pushing open the creaky door. Inside, the air was stale and musty. Shelves were lined with dusty, outdated products, and the cooler hummed with an unnatural vibration. The counter was empty, but a small bell sat beside the register. I rang it, the sound echoing unnervingly in the silence. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No response. Feeling uneasy, I wandered the aisles, looking for any sign of life. That's when I noticed the door at the back of the store, slightly ajar. A faint light flickered from within. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I asked, approaching the door. No answer. I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit office. Papers were strewn across the desk, and a small TV in the corner buzzed with static. A sense of dread washed over me, but I couldn't leave without paying. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard it, a faint, muffled crying. It was coming from the back of the office. My heart pounded as I moved closer to a closet door, the cries growing louder. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Inside was a young woman, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear. She tried to scream through the gag, her eyes pleading for help. I quickly untied her, and she clung to me, trembling. "We need to get out of here," she whispered urgently. "He's coming back." "Who?" I asked, but she was already pulling me towards the front of the store. As we reached the main area, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. The door creaked open, and a tall, shadowy figure entered, a sinister smile playing on his lips. He held a large knife, the blade glinting in the flickering light. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice a chilling whisper. The girl screamed, and we bolted for the exit. He lunged at us, but I managed to push a shelf in his path, buying us a few precious seconds. We burst out of the store and ran towards my car. "Get in!" I shouted, fumbling with my keys. The engine roared to life, and we sped away, the maniac's figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. My heart pounded as I glanced at the girl beside me, her face pale and terrified. "Who was that?" I asked. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I was hitchhiking, and he picked me up. He seemed nice at first, but then he brought me here and... She broke down, sobbing. I drove as fast as I could, the gas station disappearing into the darkness behind us. I didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, where I found a police station. They took our statements, and the girl was taken to a hospital. I never found out what happened to the man at the gas station. The police investigated, but they found no trace of him. The gas station was abandoned, and the car I had seen was gone. To this day, I can't drive past a lonely gas station without feeling a chill run down my spine. The memory of that night haunts me, a reminder of how close I came to becoming another one of his victims.
Story 2. The Silent Fields. I was on my way to visit my girlfriend, who lived a few hours away in a small rural town. The drive was pleasant enough, with rolling hills and endless fields stretching out on either side of the road. But as evening fell, my car's low fuel warning light blinked on. I checked my phone for the nearest gas station, but the signal was weak. After a few frustrating minutes, I finally found one, about 10 miles ahead. I hoped my car would make it. The road grew narrower and more isolated as I drove, the fields darkening under the twilight sky. Finally, I saw the gas station up ahead, a lone beacon of light in the vast emptiness. It was a small, old-fashioned place, with a single pump and a tiny store. I pulled up and got out, the cool evening air sending a shiver down my spine. The station was eerily quiet, and I noticed the surrounding fields were unnaturally still, not a single sound of wildlife. I started pumping gas and looked around. The store's windows were dark, but I could see a flickering light inside. I needed to pay, so I headed towards the door. It creaked open, and I stepped inside. The store was dimly lit, and the shelves were lined with dusty products. An old man stood behind the counter, staring at me with vacant eyes. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just need to pay for the gas." The old man nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. He didn't speak, just rang up the total on an ancient cash register. I handed him my card, and he swiped it, his eyes still locked on me. "Thanks," I said, taking my card back. "Have a good night." He nodded again, and I quickly left the store, the door creaking shut behind me. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sudden chill, as if I was being watched. I glanced around but saw nothing. I finished pumping gas and got into my car, eager to leave. As I started the engine, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the fields, just beyond the station's light. It was a woman, her long hair blowing in the wind. She was staring at me, her eyes dark and hollow. A sense of dread washed over me, and I quickly drove away, not daring to look back. The road seemed even darker now, the fields stretching out endlessly on either side. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a pair of headlights in the distance. They grew closer, but no matter how fast I drove, they stayed the same distance behind me. The road twisted and turned, and soon I was completely lost. My GPS was useless, and my phone had no signal. The headlights behind me vanished, and I was alone in the darkness. After what felt like hours, I saw a faint light up ahead. It was a farmhouse, its windows glowing warmly. Desperate for help, I pulled into the driveway and got out, my heart pounding. I knocked on the door, and a middle-aged woman answered. She looked at me with concern as I explained my situation. "Come in," she said, her voice kind. "You must be exhausted. I'll call for help." Grateful, I stepped inside. The house was cozy, filled with the smell of baking bread. She led me to the living room and offered me a seat. "Thank you," I said, sinking into the couch. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." She smiled and handed me a cup of tea. "It's no trouble. You must be careful on these roads at night. Strange things happen out here." I sipped the tea, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. But as the minutes passed, I began to feel drowsy, my eyelids growing heavy. "Are you all right?" the woman asked, her voice distant. I'm just tired," I mumbled, my vision blurring. The last thing I saw was her smile, a hint of malice in her eyes. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in a field, the sun just beginning to rise. My car was gone, and so was the farmhouse. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented and terrified. I walked for hours until I found a road and flagged down a passing car. The driver took me to the nearest town, where I contacted the police. They found my car abandoned a few miles from the gas station, but there was no trace of the farmhouse or the woman. I never found out what happened that night, but I know I'll never drive those lonely roads again. The memory of the woman's eyes haunts me, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the most unexpected places.
Story 3, The Rest Stop. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a quick visit to my parents' house for the weekend. But somewhere along the way, I took a wrong turn and ended up on a deserted country road. My phone's GPS had lost signal, and I was running dangerously low on gas. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a rest stop ahead. It was a small, isolated place with a single gas pump and a rundown convenience store. The flickering neon sign read open, but it looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. I pulled in, my car sputtering as it came to a stop. The rest stop was eerily quiet, the only sound the creak of the old metal sign swaying in the breeze. I got out and started pumping gas, glancing around nervously. The store's windows were dark, but there was a faint light coming from the back. I needed to use the restroom and pay for the gas, so I headed inside. The doorbell chimed as I entered, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The interior was dimly lit, with shelves stocked with dusty, outdated products. A faint smell of mildew hung in the air. At the counter, a middle-aged man with a weathered face looked up from a magazine. "Evening," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Need some gas?" "Yeah, and I need to use the restroom," I replied. He nodded and pointed to the back. "Down the hall, last door on the left." I thanked him and made my way down the narrow hallway. The restroom was small and dingy, with a flickering fluorescent light. As I washed my hands, I heard a faint rhythmic tapping coming from the other side of the wall. Curious, I pressed my ear against the wall. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. It sounded like someone tapping a metal object against the pipes. I felt a chill run down my spine and quickly left the restroom. As I walked back to the front of the store, I noticed the door slightly ajar near the restroom. The tapping was louder here. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open and peered inside. The room was dark, but I could make out the shape of a large metal tank in the center. The tapping was coming from inside the tank. My heart pounded as I approached, the sound growing louder with each step. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I reached out and touched the tank, the metal cold and smooth under my fingers. The tapping stopped abruptly, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then a voice, faint and desperate, echoed from within. "Help me." I stumbled back, my mind racing. Someone was trapped inside. I ran back to the front of the store, my pulse pounding in my ears. "There's someone in the back, in a tank." I shouted at the man behind the counter. He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "You must be mistaken," he said calmly. "There's no one back there. I heard them. I insisted. They need help." The man's eyes narrowed, and he stood up, his posture menacing. "I think you should leave," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Fear surged through me, and I bolted for the door. As I reached my car, I heard the tapping again, louder and more frantic. The man's footsteps echoed behind me, and I fumbled with my keys, my hand shaking. I finally managed to start the car and sped away. The rest stopped, disappearing into the night. The tapping still echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the voice inside the tank. I drove for miles, not stopping until I reached a well-lit gas station on the outskirts of small town. Shaking, I told the attendant what had happened, but he just gave me a puzzled look. "There's no rest stop around here," he said. "You must be mistaken." But I knew what I had heard. The voice, the tapping, it was real. I filled up my tank and continued my journey, the memory of that night forever etched in my mind. I never found out who was in the tank or why the man at the rest stop wanted to keep them hidden. But I know I'll never stop at another isolated rest stop again. The darkness that lurks in those places is something I never want to encounter again.